The story begins on the edge of the Arizona Territory, around the late 1870s, a landscape scarred by conflict and survival. The sun burns white over endless dust and the air tastes of copper and sand. Here, in a small, crumbling cabin surrounded by lifeless fields, lives Margaret Hale, a young widow of 26. Her husband, Thomas, was a farmer and a veteran of the frontier wars, killed 6 months earlier during a raid blamed on the Apache. Since that day, her world has withered like the crops outside her door. Margaret's days begin before dawn. She wakes to her son's coughing, a dry, harsh sound that echoes through the hollow cabin. Daniel, just 5 years old, clings to her skirt as she lights the fire with trembling hands. Their only food is a handful of cornmeal, stretched with water into a thin paste. She whispers soft words to keep his hope alive. But her own faith falters with each sunrise. The cabin stands far from town because her husband once wanted land enough for a man's pride. Now it's isolation, a prison. The nearest settlement is miles away and she dares not go often. People there whisper when she enters. They say, "That's the widow Hale, cursed maybe, since her husband died so brutally." Her hands shake as she trades for flour or salt, always aware of the suspicious eyes watching her back. When she returns home, she kneels by the riverbank to wash clothes, staring into the water and remembering the woman she used to be, hopeful, strong, with a husband beside her. Now her reflection shows a gaunt face framed by tangled auburn hair, and eyes dull from sleepless nights. The woman in the water looks like a ghost. One cold afternoon, while searching for firewood, Margaret wanders farther than usual, desperate to find anything that might burn. Daniel trails behind, clutching a stick, pretending it's a sword. The forest feels heavy, silent except for the rustle of wind. Then a sound, a rustle that's not the wind. She freezes. Her heart races. The stories come flooding back, tales of Apaches who strike like shadows. Slowly she turns her head, and there, half hidden behind the mesquite trees, stands a tall figure. Bronze skin, long dark hair tied with leather, a feather streaked with red paint. Margaret gasps and pulls Daniel close. "Don't move," she whispers, but her voice trembles. Her heart beats so hard she can feel it in her ears. She backs away, but her foot catches on a root and she falls. Daniel begins to cry. From the shadows, the man steps forward, not with violence, but with calm purpose. His eyes are dark, unreadable. He holds 2 bundles of deerskin, one in each arm. At first, she thinks they're food. Then the bundles move. Small arms stretch out. A soft cry breaks the silence. Babies. The man speaks in broken English, his voice deep but not threatening. "Do not run, white woman," he says. "I come not for war." Margaret can barely breathe. She stares at the twins, frail and feverish. One coughs weakly. "My name is Nantan," he says after a pause. "My woman, gone. My baby's hungry." Her fear softens for a moment. She knows hunger. She sees it in those infants' sunken cheeks. But before pity can take hold, the memory of her husband's death floods her again. Rage flickers in her chest. "You people took everything from me," she spits, clutching Daniel. Your kind killed my husband." The man lowers his gaze as if he bears that guilt on his shoulders already. "Then I owe you more than one life," he says softly. She doesn't understand his words. Before she can reply, he says something that stops her breath entirely, a sentence strange, blunt, and filled with meaning beyond her understanding. "Your child needs to learn to hunt. My babies need to be breastfed." For a moment, she thinks she misheard. The sentence stings like insult, yet his tone is not commanding. It is pleading. She sees the tremor in his hand, the desperation in his eyes. This isn't a warrior boasting, this is a father begging. Margaret's first instinct is revulsion. "Never," she whispers, clutching her son. But as she looks again at the 2 small babies, lips cracked, skin pale from hunger, something ancient stirs within her. A mother's instinct stronger than fear or prejudice. She stands frozen, torn between pride and compassion. In her arms, Daniel whimpers, his own belly empty. She realizes something bitter. She cannot feed her own child much longer either. The corn is gone. The fields are dead. The winter is coming. Nantan notices her hesitation. He steps closer, slowly, and lays something at her feet. A fresh rabbit, still warm, its fur damp with blood. Then from his pouch he takes out dried meat and a water flask. He pushes them toward her with quiet dignity, trade, he says. Not take. The word trade pierces through her fear. He is not threatening her. He is offering peace in the only language he knows. She kneels slowly, touching the rabbit. It's heavy, fresh, real food. Daniel's eyes widen. Margaret looks at Nantan again, this time seeing not a savage but a man whose children will die if she turns him away. That night, she brings him into her cabin. The air is tense, the walls thick with silence. She nurses the twins beside her own son, her heart thudding in confusion. Nantan sits by the fire, watching with quiet gratitude as though witnessing something sacred. The babies stop crying for the first time in days, their small hands curling against her shawl. Margaret feels tears sting her eyes. She tells herself it's wrong, unnatural, yet inside something heals. For the first time since Thomas's death, she doesn't feel entirely alone. Outside, the desert wind howls. Inside, 3 children, 2 Apache and 1 white, sleep peacefully in her arms. Nantan keeps watch through the night, his knife drawn not against her but for her. When dawn breaks, the world feels changed. Margaret steps outside to fetch water and sees the sunrise painting the land gold and red. Behind her in the doorway, Nantan stands with the twins. Daniel toddles beside him, already trying to mimic the warrior's steady stance. In that moment, she understands. Fate had brought them together not as enemies, but as 2 lost souls seeking the same thing, survival and a reason to keep living. The words Nantan spoke echo again in her mind, no longer sounding foreign or harsh. Your child needs to learn to hunt. My babies need to be breastfed. They are not just words of exchange. They are the beginning of a shared life, a pact born from hunger, loss, and an unspoken truth that transcends the walls built by hate. Meaning of outline. 1. This first chapter establishes the emotional foundation of the story. It's not about romance yet. It's about raw survival and unexpected humanity. The widow, Margaret, represents grief and prejudice softened by compassion. The Apache, Nantan, represents loss and resilience. Their meeting is both shocking and deeply symbolic. 2 wounded worlds crossing paths. The pivotal moment, his proposition, is not meant to degrade her but to offer equality in desperation. His hunting skills for her nurturing strength. This sets the tone for everything that follows. Their bond, their conflict with society, and their ultimate transformation from fear to love. By the end of this outline, we see that kindness begins not when 2 people understand each other's language, but when they understand each other's pain. The following days after Nantan's first visit unfold in uneasy silence. Margaret Hale wakes before dawn, her every instinct still wary. The cabin feels different now, not empty but watched over by something foreign. She can hear the soft breathing of the Apache twins sleeping near the hearth. Daniel curls up beside her, clutching his wooden toy horse. The fire burns low and outside frost whitens the earth. She tells herself she should send the man away. Every law of her people, every whispered warning insists this is wrong. A white woman and an Apache warrior. Even the thought would scandalize the whole town. Yet, as she watches the twins stir and whimper in their sleep, her heart tightens. She had buried 2 infants of her own before Daniel was born. She remembers the sound of their tiny cries fading in her arms. She cannot turn away from another mother's loss, even if that mother was from a tribe she once feared. When Nantan returns from hunting, his quiet presence fills the small room. He always approaches slowly, never sudden, as if careful not to break her fragile sense of safety. In his hands he carries gifts, a rabbit, sometimes venison, and once a small bundle of herbs for her cough. He never demands. He simply leaves them by the door and waits for her to nod before entering. Margaret begins to notice small things about him. He never wastes words. He moves with purpose, silent as shadow, but every gesture holds dignity. His dark eyes, once frightening, now hold the weight of sorrow and patience. When he speaks, his English is broken but gentle. He asks her permission before touching anything in her home, even a piece of firewood. Days pass. A rhythm forms, awkward but steady. Margaret nurses the Apache twins beside Daniel. She hums lullabies she once sang to her own children. Nantan, in return, hunts and repairs the roof, replacing broken boards with bark and hide to keep out the wind. Daniel begins to follow him outside, curious and eager to learn. At first, Margaret forbids it. "You'll stay inside where it's safe," she says, voice sharp with fear. But Daniel looks up at her, eyes bright. "He's teaching me to track, Mama. He says I got good eyes." Margaret's breath catches. She wants to say no, to protect her son from the man she once saw as a killer. But she can't ignore the joy in Daniel's voice. For the first time since Thomas's death, her boy is laughing again. She watches them from the doorway. Nantan crouching in the dirt, tracing animal tracks with a stick. Daniel beside him, eyes wide, copying every motion. The boy's pale hair glows in the sunlight beside the Apache's dark braid. A sight so strange and yet so right, it brings tears to her eyes. The warrior is teaching her son something no book or preacher could. How to listen to the land, to survive in a world that has turned its back on mercy. Each evening they share what little they have. Margaret cooks what Nantan brings, roasted rabbit or stew thickened with wild roots. She has never tasted food like this before, flavored with herbs he gathers. Sometimes she catches herself smiling when he silently places a bowl in front of her before serving himself. It feels almost like family, yet the outside world remains cruel. Whenever Margaret goes to town for supplies, she senses the whispers tightening around her. "Have you seen her lately?" one woman murmurs. "They say she keeps company with an Apache." "She's feeding his babies," says another, her voice dripping with disgust. Margaret lowers her gaze, clutching her basket. The words sting, but she does not reply. The truth is, she doesn't know how to explain what's happening, not even to herself. One night, while the children sleep, she finds herself sitting by the fire opposite Nantan. Shadows flicker across his face as he sharpens his knife, not with menace, but method. The sound of metal against stone fills the room. Finally, she speaks. "Why me?" she asks softly. "Why come to me, of all people?" He stops, meeting her eyes. "You alone," he says, struggling for words. "You stay when others run. You not fear death." She almost laughs, but the sound catches in her throat. "You think I'm brave?" "I was terrified." He nods slowly. "But you stayed." Those 3 words carry more weight than any compliment she's ever received. As days turn to weeks, the children grow healthier. The twins, Tazi and Noya, now crawl across the cabin floor, their laughter echoing like music. Daniel, once thin and pale, gains color in his cheeks. He shows off his small catches, a rabbit, a fish, proudly offering them to his mother. Margaret praises him, though part of her heart aches to think her son is learning an Apache's way of life. And yet, it keeps them alive. In quiet moments, she watches Nantan with his children. He holds them gently, humming low songs in his own tongue. His voice is deep, steady, and strangely soothing. Once she asks what the words mean. "They are prayers," he replies, "to thank the spirits for another day with breath." She doesn't understand his beliefs, but she respects the reverence in his tone. He never forces his ways on her. He simply lives them. One evening, while sewing torn cloth by the fire, Margaret looks up to see Nantan kneeling beside Daniel, showing him how to string a bow. The boy fumbles, his small fingers clumsy, but Nantan guides him patiently. A smile, and rare and warm, flickers across the warrior's face. For the first time, she realizes how long it's been since she's seen such gentleness in a man. Later that night, she catches herself humming again, her voice low and soft. The cabin feels alive, she feels alive. But peace is a fragile thing on the frontier. One afternoon, as she washes clothes by the river, she hears distant hoofbeats. Looking up, she sees 2 trappers she recognizes from town. They rein in their horses, smirking as they spot her. "Well, look who it is," one says. "The widow Hale. Heard you got yourself new company." She stiffens. "Mind your business." The other man spits tobacco. "An Apache, huh? Guess loneliness makes a woman forget what's decent." Their laughter cuts like knives. She turns away, clutching the wet linens to her chest, shame and fury burning inside her. That night, she tells Nantan what happened, warning him not to come near the town again. He nods, expression unreadable. "They bring trouble," he says. But trouble comes anyway. His words prove true sooner than either expects. A week later, Daniel runs home out of breath. "Mama, I saw men on horses near the hill." "They had guns." Margaret's heart lurches. She looks at Nantan, who stands instantly alert. "Settlers," he says quietly. "Looking for me." The realization hits her, and if they find him here, they'll kill him without a question. He could leave, vanish into the wild, but that would mean abandoning his children. Margaret knows he will not. That night, after the children fall asleep, they sit again by the fire. The silence between them feels heavier than before. She finally whispers, They'll come soon. You could go, take your babies and run. He shakes his head. No, you feed them. You keep them warm, I stay. I owe, she looks at him in disbelief. Owe me what? His gaze softens. Life. 3 lives. Her throat tightens. She wants to argue, but words fail. Deep down, she knows that whatever happens next, their fates are now bound together. Winter arrived early that year. The winds howled across the desert, sweeping over the mountains and filling the canyons with snow. Margaret's cabin, once silent and lonely, now pulsed with the warmth of shared life. The Apache twins, Taji and Noya, laughed as they learned to walk, their small footprints marking the cold floor. Daniel, growing taller, practiced with his bow beside Nantan, his face flushed with pride each time he managed to hit a target of hay or bark. But for Margaret, life had changed in ways she hadn't foreseen. The ache of grief still lingered, but it no longer crushed her. Each day began with purpose, tending the children, keeping the fire alive, cooking whatever Nantan brought from the hunt. And each night, when the snow pressed against the windows, she found comfort in the quiet strength of the man sitting across from her. It had been months since they first met, yet Margaret still didn't fully understand the man who had entered her life so suddenly. Nantan spoke little, but his silence was never cold. He listened when to the wind, the crackle of fire, the soft murmurs of the children. His presence filled the cabin not with fear but with peace. Sometimes she caught herself studying him, the curve of his jaw, the steady way he moved, the quiet discipline in every motion. There was a calm about him that no settler she'd ever known possessed. He never raised his voice, never wasted food or breath. And though they came from worlds divided by blood and history, the rhythm of their lives began to flow in harmony. One night, as she sat by the fire mending Daniel's coat, Nantan placed a bundle of herbs on the table. For sickness, he said simply, you burn in water. Keep children strong. She smiled faintly, touched by the small gesture. You think of everything, she said. He shook his head. Not everything. Just what I can. Their eyes met, brief, unspoken understanding passing between them. In that moment, Margaret realized she had stopped fearing him long ago. Somewhere between the hunger, the shared work, and the children's laughter, her fear had turned into something gentler, respect, gratitude, and perhaps something even deeper that she dared not name. The nights grew colder, the snow heavier. Some evenings, when the wind howled through the cracks in the roof, she found herself wishing he would stay closer to the fire instead of sleeping near the door. She would listen to his breathing, steady and strong, a sound that grounded her in the chaos of her memories. Daniel adored him. He called him Nanta, his small tongue unable to pronounce the full name, and followed him everywhere. Margaret sometimes watched from the window as her son ran behind the Apache, laughing in the snow, carrying a stick like a spear. It filled her with warmth and fear all at once. Warmth because Daniel was alive again, and fear because she knew how the world outside would see this sight. Then came the letter, delivered by a passing trader who sometimes brought her supplies. It was from Sheriff Ward, the man from town who had once offered to help her after Thomas's death. His words were polite on paper but heavy with warning. People are talking, Mrs. Hale. A woman alone cannot afford rumors. I'll come by soon. We'll talk about what's best for you. Margaret read the letter twice, her stomach tightening. She could almost hear his oily voice, feel his eyes on her as he'd stood in her doorway months ago, hinting that a woman like her needed protection. She burned the letter that night, watching the flames curl around the paper until nothing was left but ash. She told Nantan nothing, but he must have sensed her unease. He always did. The firelight moment one evening, a blizzard trapped them indoors. The snow roared outside, piling high against the door. Inside, the fire blazed bright, filling the cabin with flickering gold light. Margaret sat by the hearth, mending a torn blanket. Nantan sat nearby, carving a small wooden figure, an eagle with spread wings, for Daniel. The children were asleep. Only the two of them remained awake, and the silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice soft. Do you ever miss your people? Nantan looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the fire. Every breath, he said quietly. But missing does not bring them back. She lowered her gaze. I know that feeling. He nodded slowly. Your husband? Yes. After a long pause, he said something unexpected. You still love him. Margaret hesitated. I suppose I do. But it's not the same anymore. Love doesn't die, but it changes. It becomes memory. He stared into the fire. Then memory is love that still breathes. The word struck her in a simple, poetic, profound. She felt a sting of tears. No man had spoken to her like that in years. Later, as she placed another log on the fire, her hand brushed his. Just a moment, a spark, and but enough to make her heart quicken. She looked up, startled, but his gaze held only calm. No presumption, no demand. Just a quiet understanding. That night, when she finally lay down beside the sleeping children, she listened for the storm outside. But all she could hear was the soft rhythm of Nantan's breathing, steady as the earth itself. The threat returns as spring approached. The snow began to melt. The world outside seemed ready to bloom again, but danger was returning with the thaw. Rumors spread through the nearby settlements. Talk of Apache scouts in the hills, of missing cattle, of revenge raids. And with the rumors came the men, settlers armed with rifles, eager for a reason to fight. Daniel was the first to see them. He came running from the woods, breathless. "Mama, men on horses! They're coming down the hill!" Margaret's blood turned to ice. She looked at Nantan. His expression was calm, but his hand went to his bow. "They come for me," he said, "or for the land. It does not matter. It always ends the same." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You've done nothing wrong." "You saved us!" He looked at her, his face unreadable. "To them I am wrong for breathing." That night they prepared for the worst. Margaret hid the children under the trapdoor that led to the old cellar. Nantan took his bow and stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. The tension between them was unbearable. Not just fear, but something deeper, heavier. She stepped beside him, her hand trembling. "If they find you here, they'll kill you." He didn't look away from the window. "Then they kill me, but they will not take you. You can't stay." "I must." "The twins. Your boy," her throat tightened. "I can't lose another man," she whispered. Finally he turned, his gaze soft but firm. "You will not lose me. Not like that." The words were quiet, but they carried more weight than any promise she'd ever heard. The moment of realization. The attack didn't come that night. Only silence. But something changed between them forever. In the stillness after fear, they found something unspoken, a recognition of what they had become to each other. Margaret understood it when she woke to find him watching over the children, the early light painting his face gold. There was tenderness in the way he looked at them, at her son, at his twins, at her. And suddenly she knew. Love had crept into her heart without asking permission. It had come quietly, disguised as gratitude, as friendship, as survival. But it was love all the same, real, raw, and impossible. That morning, as she poured coffee into a tin cup, she caught herself smiling at him. He noticed. A faint smile touched his own lips in return. Hesitant, unsure, but genuine. No words were spoken. They didn't need them. The silence between them was full of everything they could not say. When spring arrived, the valley bloomed again. Wildflowers painted the meadows, and the river ran full with melted snow. Yet inside Martha there was a storm. Her months among the Apache had softened her. Their rhythm of life, their songs at dusk, the laughter of the children who no longer saw her as an outsider, all had seeped into her bones. But she also remembered her old world. The church bell, the English prayers, the memory of her husband's grave back east. Torn between two worlds, she began to realize that both had shaped her into who she had become. No longer the trembling widow who arrived with nothing, but a woman with two homes tugging at her heart. One morning, Taza returned from hunting and found her sitting by the river, staring at her reflection. She told him she wanted to visit the nearby settlement, not to leave but to understand what she truly wanted. Taza listened silently, his dark eyes unreadable. After a moment he handed her his mother's turquoise bracelet, saying, "Wherever you go, you carry my people's trust." When Martha reached the settlement, she was struck by how foreign it felt. The people looked at her with suspicion when she arrived wearing Apache clothing and holding an Indian-made cradle board. The minister's wife whispered, "She's been living among them savages," and children pointed at her son. The widow realized how easily hate could be planted, and how her old world had always judged what it never tried to understand. As days passed, She helped with chores at the settlement and saw the difference between how they lived and how the Apache did. The settlers talked of progress and civilization, yet their women were tired, their children hungry, their eyes dulled by fear. When a smallpox outbreak hit, Martha tended the sick as she had learned from the Apache healers using herbs and smoke rituals. Some people scoffed, until the fevered children began to recover. Her heart softened when one settler woman, the same who had whispered against her, thanked her with tears. Martha realized then that she had bridged a divide no one else dared to cross. She was neither fully settler nor fully Apache. She was something in between, something new. A week later, Taza came for her. He didn't demand, didn't speak, just waited by the horses. The sight of him, calm, grounded, belonging so wholly to the earth, filled her with peace. She looked back at the settlement and then at him, and her heart made its choice. She returned to the valley with him. Under the starlit sky, with the children asleep and the fire whispering, she told Taza, "I don't belong to one people. I belong to both. And maybe that's what our children will teach the world, how to live without hate." Taza smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Then they will be warriors of peace," he said. From that night forward, the widow and the Apache raised their children together. Hers learning to hunt, his growing strong from her milk, both learning that love could build bridges even war could not burn. She became known among both peoples as the woman of two fires, one flame born of sorrow, the other of love, and her name lived on in stories told beside the campfire, whispered in English and Apache alike.
Years passed, and the once widowed woman, Martha, now walked through the valley not as an outsider, but as a symbol of unity. The Apache called her Nadi Ahe, Blessed Mother, for the peace she brought to both camps. The settlers, though slower to understand, began to whisper her name with respect, realizing that the woman they once shunned had done something no preacher or soldier could ever do. She had taught two worlds to see each other as human. Her children, Samuel, her son by her first husband, and little Hawk, the boy she had nursed from Taza's clan, grew up side by side, learning both English and Apache, both prayers from the Bible and songs to the spirits. Samuel learned to hunt under Taza's guidance, and little Hawk learned to read English under Martha's patient hand. Together, they became living proof that love could grow in soil once soaked with blood. One summer, when a drought struck the valley, tensions rose again. The settlers blamed the Apache for taking too much water from the river, while the Apache believed the settlers' cattle had polluted their sacred stream. Old wounds reopened, and whispers of violence began to spread. Martha knew this moment could undo everything she and Taza had built. So she did the only thing her heart told her. She called both sides to meet at the riverbank, the same place where she had once buried her fears and found new life. Dressed in her simple calico dress, but with turquoise beads at her neck, a gift from Taza's mother, she stood between them, her sons at her side. The settlers shouted, the Apache glared, and the air thickened with anger. Then Martha raised her voice, soft but steady. "If you destroy each other," she said, "you'll destroy the valley that feeds your children. My son learned to hunt from him," she pointed to Taza, "and his child learned to read from me. If they can live as brothers, then why can't we?" For a moment, silence hung over the water. Then Samuel stepped forward, offering his bow to one of the settlers' sons. Little Hawk followed, handing over a jug of clean water. The gesture, small, pure, broke something inside the crowd. The elders began to lower their weapons. By sunset, both sides had shared food, trading bread for venison, stories for songs. The drought didn't end that day, but the hatred did. The settlers agreed to share the river, and the Apache promised to help dig wells. Peace, real peace, began not from treaties or leaders, but from a mother's courage to stand between two fires. That night, Martha and Taza sat beside the fire, watching their children play. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if the heavens themselves approved. Taza looked at her and said softly, "You were once a widow who thought she had nothing left, but now you've given two peoples a future." Years later, when Martha's hair turned silver, the valley became a place of trade and friendship. Travelers from faraway towns told tales of the widow who taught peace, a woman who gave milk to the children of her enemies and raised them as her own. The Apache spoke of her spirit living in the wind that whispered through the cottonwoods, gentle, guiding, eternal. When she passed away, both the settlers and the Apache gathered by the river to bury her. One side prayed in English, the other sang in their native tongue. Her grave lay at the meeting of the two worlds, neither on the settlers' land nor in Apache soil, but on the bridge of earth that touched both. Samuel and Little Hawk stood together, their hands clasped. One wearing his mother's cross, the other her turquoise beads. They promised to keep her legacy alive, to raise their children with the same love she had shown, and to never let hatred take root again. In the years that followed, the valley thrived. It became a place where Apache and settlers traded, lived, and celebrated together. People would point to the twin boys riding across the hills and say, "Those are Martha's sons, the ones who taught us how to live as one people." And every spring, when the wildflowers returned to the riverbank, it was said the wind carried a whisper. "Your child needs to learn to hunt. My babies need to be breastfed." Not as a command anymore, but as a reminder of the day two hearts, one wounded and one wise, turned survival into love, and love into legacy.